All right, so this is a corkscrew willow. It is not a tree. It is a branch segment. I'm an arborist, so I have access to some pretty bizarre material. This would have been cut from inside of a tree while climbing off of a climbing line. So I would have, been inside the kind of the crotches of these branches and being able to identify which portions of branch would make the best bonsai. It's a really weird way to approach it, but this is upside down right now.
Okay.
You picture this is getting fatter and closer to the trunk this direction,
Right.
and all these roots are just branches coming off the tip of this.
Okay, right.
So this was probably hard cut by a utility arborist or something at some point because it was close to a road edge. It forked out like that.
What a smart way to build Navari, eh? Build it out of the branches.
Yeah. So you're definitely gonna have inverse taper because of that.
Yeah.
This was my second attempt of taking a willow cutting, we'll say, and rooting it.
Love it.
It rooted incredibly well. I had it just sitting in water in this lovely purple container. What, 4 months or so it sat there, and it rooted like crazy.
Okay.
And I decided
just in water.
Just in water.
4 months in water.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
wow.
I was getting impatient. I wanted to put it into some kind of substrate to start growing roots that are actually useful. So I did that in probably August or something.
Okay.
And that was likely bad timing. All these little dead bits had been growing.
Oh, okay.
And during that transition out of the water into 100% pumice, it went and died back to just what we have
too dry,
here.
do you think, or what was hard to say?
Hard to say. Like,
Middle
not
August.
understanding the biology of it, I'm guessing the roots that are put out into just straight water are a bit different than the ones that it's going to put into soil.
Yeah.
So it didn't die, but I did lose some progress up there. The thought was this was always going to be carved anyway, so
Right.
I'm not really losing anything, but I would have reduced the vigor of the tree. So in retrospect, I maybe should have gotten it out of the water sooner, or left it in there longer and then waited for cooler weather possibly to go and transition it.
Right.
Or maybe something in between where I fill the water up with pumice and just have one tiny drainage hole so that it holds onto water most of the time, but by the end of the day it's starting to dry up a little bit.
Yeah.
Hard to say. I'll keep on
Did you
trying.
fertilize it at all during that time? Did you give it fertilizer, or just straight water?
Not when it was in the water, no.
Okay.
I didn't know whether or not that would be helpful at all.
Yeah.
Just having that sitting in there. The time of year that this was cut was months don't really matter, is when the buds were just starting to open up. I likely could have done it slightly before that. It might have been slightly better for it.
Yep.
But I just wanted to know that the vascular tissue, all this was loaded up with sugars,
Right.
because that's what fed root development. It grew roots and branches and foliage all at the same time. They all kind of happened at once.
And were these shoots coming out, or are these newer ones?
These are all new. This was
Really?
completely
Okay.
bare.
Wow.
There was
So
not a
this is-
single
yeah. And
branch or piece of green on this.
How many years are we to this? Like,
This is 1 year.
1 year.
It'll be 1
Amazing.
year in spring, so
Wow.
9 months or something.
Wow.
right
So
now.
this is just 1 year's growth.
1 year's growth.
Wow. Amazing
Yeah.
how much it's.
And the movement that it has is just unique to the species.
Yeah.
There's actually a corkscrew willow behind us that's showing that off. They just do these crazy kind of arcing, spiraling patterns. So this will be an interesting one to work on.
What do you just carve in there? Like, what do you do?
Yeah,
Like
I'll-
Graham Potter type.
Yeah, just carve some kind of a deep hollow kind of
Yeah.
mouth of a dragon or something in there.
Yeah.
Um,
That's cool. Especially with this corkscrewy.
Yeah.
You could really get some unique features in there. It wouldn't contrast too much, right?
Exactly.
You'd get some nice flow.
yeah,
there.
add some kind of angular movement to the primary,
Yep.
just to match the movement of the trunk, I think, and go from there. It'll be a fun long-term project. Just starting now, but it's a good kind of information on if you've got a willow tree in your yard, or for whatever reason you have access to one that's being cut down. Every single branch could be a bonsai. Just try to pick the best one, the one that's going to give you the best base, the best movement that exists, and then just build it all from there.
Well, and I love this idea of using the branches, flipping it over and using the branches to create the Navari. And then, I mean, obviously, like you said, you have the inverse or reverse taper.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of deal with that. But
Yeah.
I love that concept, especially to get that when you have such a big tree to start with, like a big branch that you're going to turn into a tree. I mean, how do you get the roots to get any flare? And so then that's a brilliant idea.
Also, collecting willow would prove difficult, right? Because they're growing in such moist conditions that the likelihood that they're going to have nice feeder roots all at the top and you're going to get this beautiful root ball is doubtful. But you don't need that. If you find a willow growing, you can sustainably harvest it just by cutting it in the spring. It'll sucker up from the roots that you left, and then you can grow that trunk as a bonsai. So the net loss was negative. You ended up gaining a tree, and now there's a willow bush instead of a willow tree somewhere. So yeah, they're fun for that reason. This is a Doug fir. It came out of a rock, but not off a mountain. It was off of a beach, actually. I shouldn't say a beach, but relatively close to the water. Really, really windy spot, and next to a little private trail on a client's property. So I suspect it had been cut back just because its proximity to the trail. It was probably kind of arcing into it. Right. Either way, it's best I can tell it's quite old, based on the width of the trunk and the bark development on it. Like even the roots, you can see the kind of craggy and flaky bark starting to form.
Yeah, that's great.
You can also kind of judge that by callus roll and whatnot up on here on this gin. It's 2 years out of collection, so it's got a long ways to go, but promising because I've got buds popping up everywhere on this old wood. So that's
back bud a bunch, and then
exactly
you can use all that.
Exactly. As long as there's not bark, as long as it's got this kind of gray hue and it isn't maybe looking like this. I doubt I'll get any buds on something like that. But the whole length of this, I'm expecting to get some amount of budding. If I can get those to actually turn into foliage and open up, I'll probably be good to start styling at that point. So likely another full year with no to very, very limited cutting. And hopefully the following year, initial styling. No idea what I'm going to do with this tree. It's a bit of a tough one because you've got a lot of really, really straight sections down low and great movement up higher. So it'll be about finding a way to kind of reconcile those two things and build something interesting. But really, really happy with this tree. The collection was easy. Close to a vehicle. Appreciated it was heavy.
Yeah.
Got a lot of roots with it. So. All right, so another collected Doug fir here. This one came out of private land, just some acreage up a mountain somewhere. It was a understory tree. So most of what we're collecting is off of exposed rocks or things of that nature. And this was indeed growing on a rock, but underneath massive ponderosa pines and Doug firs. So that explains the kind of the airy sparseness of the branching that exists on it. But I'm really, really hoping that I'll get decent enough back budding that I can condense it a little bit and compress it a little bit more. It's always going to be a really elongated and sort of feminine tree in that regard. Ideally, we'll end up with some kind of multiple trunk situation. But very, very drawn to this tree because it was going to be easy to collect. Initial kind of tugs on it showed that the whole root ball was moving in this long linear crack in the stone. Not that you could see the stone because it was buried under so much duff from the larger trees, but just a highly unusual, highly interesting tree. You've got this massive grapefruit sized trunk. It's got some surface roots. They're buried under the pumice a bit right now, but yeah, this weird globular shape with these long feminine trunks coming off of it. So
totally something different.
Yeah, had to collect it. I think there's a style called like turtleback bonsai, so maybe it fits into that.
Turtleback bonsai. I've
Yeah.
never heard that. That's great.
Yeah, a number of years before I can really do any styling work on it, but yeah, highly hopeful. I mean, the root ball I got was so good, and it I had a weak year for growth. You can see how small the needles are for that first year. Last year's, this year's.
Oh, yeah.
But the buds that are forming at the tip are quite strong. So hopeful this tree's got a bright future in front of it.